analysts, particularly in stocks, but stocks, bonds, commodities, and other markets where they're really, really good on fundamentals. They can take a balance sheet and tear it apart.
In this interview, Jim Rickards discusses the intertwining relationship between politics and economics, emphasizing that they are now completely integrated. He highlights the necessity for analysts to be proficient in both fields to draw accurate conclusions. Rickards criticizes analysts who solely rely on financial statements and overlook external factors like political policies, such as the Green New Deal. Furthermore, Rickards critiques the political and economic elites for their embrace of climate change initiatives, which he views as a form of cult-like behavior. He acknowledges historical climate variations but questions the exaggerated focus on CO2 emissions and greenhouse gases. Overall, Rickards presents a critical perspective on the integration of politics and economics, and raises skepticism about certain environmental initiatives and the practicality of electric vehicles for widespread adoption.
Yeah, that is a point I've made. And just to be clear, there's always been some relationship between politics and economics, particularly on the policy side. You raise taxes, you lower taxes, that makes a difference. There are different policies you can pursue that have an impact on certain companies and their profits. So the linkage has always been there. But today it's more than linkage. They're completely integrated. And the point I was making is that you almost can't separate them. I would say you cannot separate them. Doesn't mean you cannot do the analysis, but it does mean you have to be expert in both of them and know how to integrate them in order to get the right conclusion. There are so many analysts, particularly in stocks, but stocks, bonds, commodities, and other markets where they're really, really good on fundamentals. They can take a balance sheet and tear it apart, and look for the weaknesses and look for the contingent liabilities and identify trends and all that. And they come out with a recommendation, and then they say buy the stock, and then it just gets hammered. But it got hammered for something that was not on the balance sheet, that was not in those financial statements of that analysis. They're on the wrong side of some Green New scam, as I call it. I guess we call it the Green New Deal officially, but I call it the Green New scam. Oh, by the way, quick aside, about a month ago, Donald Trump was giving a speech, one of these big rallies he has, and he said, we're going to put an end to the Green New scam. He said, Green New scam. I like that. I like this. I just invented that. I'm going to call it the Green New scam. I was like, sorry, Mr. Trump, Mr. President. We actually thought of it with my publishers and I 2 years ago, and we've been using it ever since. So maybe it just got out there in the atmosphere. So I welcome the president on board our historical chain, so to speak. But we thought of the Green New scam a couple of years ago. But on a serious note, when you look at the subsidies for windmills, solar modules, electric batteries, electric vehicles, we had a very interesting. Of course, you're in Australia, our seasons are reversed, so we're just in the middle of our winter season. But a few weeks ago, there was a case where it was bitter cold in the upper Midwest, Chicago, in Michigan, Minnesota area. Not unusual. They get that kind of weather all the time. But all these Tesla owners had gone to the charging station to get their charge. Well, two things. Number one, anyone who knows anything about cold weather and batteries, the cold weather drains the battery. Like in the best case, I do a lot of skiing. You take a cell phone with you to the top of the mountain, the battery's dead by the time you get there. At least the phone doesn't work. So their batteries were low because of the cold weather. But then, and I did not know this, it actually won't take a charge. In other words, even if you get to the charging station and you plug it in, the battery won't take a charge. You have to kind of, I don't know what the right term, kind of warm up the battery, or at least prepare the battery. So the vehicles get there. The first guy plugs it in. It won't take a charge. He's waiting hours. Everyone else is up in arms. Their batteries are all dying. All the cars died. You had a Tesla graveyard of vehicles where the battery was drained and it wouldn't take a charge. So they had to call in a fleet of tow trucks, flatbed tow trucks, and tow them all away. So much for your electric vehicles. People don't. The other thing with a Tesla, just really quickly, is that in the winter, you drive around, you want heat in the car. Well, with the internal combustion engine, it's nothing but heat. It's exploding gasoline in cylinders, basically. So you have all this heat, and all you have to do is kind of blow it into the cabin, and everyone's nice and warm. It doesn't use any extra energy because it's already there. With an electric vehicle, with the battery, if you want a heater, the heater runs off the battery. So that reduces your mileage and your range even more because you're draining the battery to get the heat to not freeze to death inside the car, hoping the battery doesn't die in the meantime. So many of these things. I mean, electric vehicle use peaked, at least in the United States, around 1910. Yeah, the electric vehicle was actually invented in 1837.
Okay.
They caught on in the first decade of the 20th century. This is 120 years ago. Yeah. About 90% of the vehicles, taxi cabs in New York, were electric vehicles. But along comes the internal combustion engine, Henry Ford, the Model A, Model T, etc., and it went away. It went away for good reasons, which is it's a really difficult, inefficient technology. It's not that it doesn't work. It works, but it works really poorly compared to the alternative. Even in the 1950s, 90% of the East German, at the time, East German Communist Postal Service used electric vehicles. That's because they didn't have any gasoline. They didn't have any money. So the point is, the battery operated vehicle is really only good for a golf cart, or maybe like a Mars lander or something of that sort. But why would you have one for your everyday vehicle? They don't go any distance, etc. Well, the answer is that, and this kind of gets back to your question about the connection of politics and economics, the elites around the world, I call them the Davos crowd, certainly the Biden White House and other countries around the world, they have bought into this, it's kind of a cult-like behavior, but this myth of climate change and CO2 emissions and greenhouse gases, et cetera. And just to be clear, climates do change. There's no question about that. No one argues the contrary. There was a Roman warm period around the 2nd century BC. There was a medieval warm period. When the Vikings went to Greenland, they weren't freezing. They were growing grapes and raising cattle in Greenland because it was a medieval warm period around the year 1000 AD. And from about 1400 to 1800, roughly, there was what they called the Little Ice Age. Right. In Northern Europe. And in the 1650s, you didn't need bridges in London. You could walk across the Thames because it was frozen solid in the winter.